David for that. If you have your Bibles, turn with us to Joshua chapter 13. Joshua chapter 13. Last week we took a little bit of a break. God had led us a different way. We've finished the conquest of Joshua that happens in the first 12 chapters. And we went through chapter 12 was the last one we've done, and it talks about all the kings that were defeated by Israel. All the different ones, and it lists them out. I mean, it's a laundry list of kings that were defeated, 31 by the nation of Israel under Joshua's leadership, and then just a couple under Moses' leadership there. I think really just two or three there. But we continue on now, chapter 13 through really what is, I think, 21. All of those are... Sometimes they're hard to read, just if we're just honest with ourselves, because they're almost administrative type stuff is what it feels like. You feel like you're walking through the just documentation of the people, but this is where they start to divide the land among the tribes. They're starting to divide out this land that has been conquered. And so that's where we start in 13, and that'll carry us all the way through 21, and then Joshua wraps it up with some final instructions in the last few chapters. But tonight we're just going to look at chapter 13 and some of the stuff that is here in this chapter here. Joshua chapter 13, starting in verse 1, it says this: "Now Joshua was old and advanced in years when the Lord said to him, 'You are old and advanced in years, and very much of the land remains to be possessed.'" I have a feeling that Joshua didn't need that reminder. They've been walking through this land, they've been conquering all these places, and he's probably tired. We left it with looking at, I think it was, chapter 11. The final verse there, the last sentence of verse 23 says, "Thus the land had rest from war." And then chapter 12 goes over all the kings that they conquered. Joshua and the people finally got to rest from war. Now, we don't know his specific age. Most people would tell you he's between 90 and 100 at this point in time. But he's still leading the people, still faithfully following God, and that's a testimony to us that Joshua at his age was still doing exactly what God wanted him to do. But it had gotten to the point where now he was old, and he was on up in years. And Joshua was not going to be leading the Israelites a whole lot of time left after this. But he had some rest here from the conquest that they had been doing. But I find it humorous that here we get, hey, he was old and advanced in years, and God said to him, "You're old. It's time to stop. It's time to hey, we've conquered a bunch of stuff, but the intriguing thing is at this point in time, when they do stop for this moment, the last part of verse 1 tells us very much of the land remains to be possessed." We looked at a map a couple of weeks ago about how much land there was and kind of what they had conquered. And I showed you the one map that didn't have, it wasn't expanding all the way out to the borders. There was still some area that was to be taken. But that was not the primary objective at this time. They'd gone in, they had conquered everything that they had conquered, and God said, hey, you know what, now it's time to rest. It may have been because of Joshua's age, it may have been just part of God's design, but there was still land that needed to be possessed, land that they had not conquered yet, that was promised to them. And we'll get to that here in just a moment. God does walk them through that over the next 6 verses. He says here in verse 2, he says, "This is the land that remains. All the regions of the Philistines and all those of the Geshurites, from the Shihor, which is east of Egypt, even as far as the border of Ekron to the north. It is counted as Canaanite. the 5 lords of the Philistines, the Gazite, the Ashdodite, the Ashkelonite, the Gittite, the Ekronite, and the Avite. Verse 4 says, to the south, all the land of the Canaanite and the Meara that belongs to the Sidonians, as far as Aphek to the border of the Amorites, and the land of the Gebelite and all of Lebanon toward the east, from Baal-Gad below Mount Hermon as far as Lebo-Hamath, all the inhabitants of the hill country from Lebanon as far as Misrephoth Maim, all the Sidonians, I will drive them out from before the sons of Israel, only allot it to Israel for an inheritance, as I have commanded you. Now therefore, apportion this land for an inheritance to the 9 tribes and the half-tribe of Manasseh. So God says, hey, there's all this land that remains to be possessed. Some of it's been taken over. Some of it has not. There's still some people groups that are around, and so they've pushed people out, and some of it there's still some of the people around. And God says there in verse 6, He still reminds them. And that's the beauty of it, is you walk through all of this area and you're looking and going, well, that feels like a lot of land to be possessed. But God told him in verse 6, He said, I will drive them out from before the sons of Israel. So even the ones that haven't been driven out yet, even the ones that are still kind of lingering in the border areas, and the ones that they have not overtaken yet, God tells them and says, hey, don't worry about it. My promise still stands true. Amen. He said, you've done a lot of work. A lot of things have happened. We've gone out and you've followed me, and I've pushed people out. We've destroyed nations, and there's cities and stuff that you're going to go and possess. But there's also some land that still remains to be possessed that we haven't taken. And He says, you know what? I'm going to drive them out from before the sons of Israel. He said, go ahead and allot it to Israel. He said, you can go ahead and divide it up as you're dividing this land to the other 9.5 tribes. Because we'll see here in just a second what Moses divided out in verses 8 through 14. You see what Moses had already divided out to the 2 tribes and the 1/2 tribe of Manasseh. And so God told Joshua here, He said, hey, there's still land that remains to be possessed. He said, but you're going to go ahead and divide it amongst the people. So because I'm faithful. So you're going to tell these people this is where they're going to go. This is their area. This is their section. Even though it's not all clear yet. He said, I'm going to drive them out. I've given you my word. And my word will hold true. And so to me, I read through that some this week, and I was just like, man, there's just, it felt like there's a lot of work still to be done. But God said, you can go ahead and divide it out. You can go ahead and divide it out, because I'm going to hold true to my end of the bargain. And for us tonight, it's one of those that you look at this, and you look at our world, and you look at our community, our county, our state, our nation, the world as a whole. There's been a lot of stuff that God has conquered. But I tell you what, feels like there's still a lot of work to be done. Feels like there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Even here. This church has been here for almost 104 years, but there's still a lot of work to be done in Molino. There's still a lot of work to be done in Escambia County. There's a lot of work that God still desires to do. God wasn't done working here. Even though the land had rest from war, He wasn't done working in this area that He was giving them. The promised land was not all cleared yet. There were still people that were living in parts of the land that God was promising to His people. So it wasn't all cleared yet. And God said, hey, we can take a moment and rest. And don't worry about that, because I'm still going to give it to you. You're still going to see victory. You're still going to see me work. And so for us tonight, as we look out the doors of this church, we see that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. There's a lot of it, and y'all are probably sitting there saying, Josh, we've been working for a long time. We've been trying. We've been trying for a while, and tonight we're just tired. That's okay. It's okay to take those moments to rest, because we need to be at full strength to fight the battles that come to us. It's okay to take those times to rest. We sat in staff meeting and talked about different vacation times and things like that. And for me, it's looking and going, hey, yeah, let's do that. Y'all find time to get away from the office, to take a Sunday off, to take a Wednesday night off, to recharge, because there's still a lot of work to do. We got people that have been traveling. We've been praying for traveling mercies. There's people that are going on vacations, and that's great, because when they come back, we got work to do. There's still a lot of work that needs to happen. And for me, I look back at that list in chapter 12 of all that they had conquered, and then I look at that list in the first handful of verses here in chapter 13, and I'm like, man, I thought they'd done a lot of that already. But there was still work to do. And so for us, the reminder is there's still work to do, but the promises of God hold true. God hadn't left us. He hadn't said, hey, Josh, this is your job. You go do this. And we'll talk about it later on. He said, no, let's put on our work boots and let's go together. And that's what God was telling these people. He said, hey, you know what, Joshua, he said, you go ahead and divide out the land. Apportion it to the people that it's supposed to be long to. He said, one day we'll finish that work. So for us, the encouragement tonight is there may be the task before us may seem like there's a lot of work left to do. And there probably is. But we're going to take it one day at a time. We're going to keep following Him. We're going to lean on Him and say, God, okay, where do we go next? Lord, what is it that you want us to do? Where is it? And God, if right now maybe we're supposed to rest for a moment, well, give us that short season of rest. Let us find those times to get away. Let us find those times to recharge, and then we'll get back to work. But in the meantime, we're going to pray. We're going to spend time lifting up those around us. We're going to spend time making sure that we're covering the work that needs to be done in prayer, even before we get to it. But I was just reminded, just looking at that, man, that's just, there's so much there, but the promises are still true. The promises are still true. That's the same for us today. The promises are still true. God is still with us. He is still working. He is still calling us to reach this community. And so we don't have to get overwhelmed, because we know God is on our side. And God is working this with us. He is leading us. He is guiding us. We can rest in Him. So He told them there in verse 7, now therefore apportion this land for an inheritance to the 9 tribes and the half tribe of Manasseh. But verse 8 goes into what's already been apportioned to them. It says, with the other half tribe, the Reubenites and the Gadites received their inheritance, which Moses gave them beyond the Jordan to the east, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave to them. And he walks through these areas from Aroer. That one's hard for me to say. I couldn't even read that one in my head earlier. Which is on the edge of the valley of the Arnon, with the city which is in the middle of the valley, and all the plain of Medeba as far as Dibon, and all the cities of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon as far as the border of the sons of Ammon, and Gilead, and the territory of the Geshurites and the Maacathites, and all Mount Hermon, and all Bashan as far as Salakah. All the kingdom of Og and Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth and in Edrei. He alone was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. For Moses struck them and dispossessed them. But the sons of Israel did not dispossess the Geshurites or the Maacathites, for Geshur and Maacath live among Israel until this day. Only to the tribe of Levi He did not give an inheritance. The offerings by fire to the Lord, the God of Israel, are their inheritance. And He spoke as He spoke to them. And so here God had told Joshua, he said, hey, you've got to apportion this land for the 9.5 tribes. And then there's the reminder here in the middle of chapter 13 of what had already been given to the half tribe of Manasseh, to the Reubenites and the Gadites, what Moses had already appointed toward them, and the places that they had overcome already. And so we have that reminder, but verse 14, and we'll actually see it again. It appears twice. Very similar wording appears twice in this chapter. Here at the end of what was apportioned to those 2.5 tribes, and then at the end of what we'll see in this chapter, we're reminded that the Levites, the tribe of Levi, were not given an inheritance. Now those were the priests of the day. Those were the people that God had set apart to do the sacrifices and the different things there. And so we'll touch base on that a little bit, but you'll see that verse. I promise we won't reread that one, but you'll see it again at the end of chapter 13. And so it continues on. We've rehashed there of what was given, but then it continues on and breaks down each territory that they were given again to each of the tribes as Moses had appointed. And so starting in verse 15, it says, so Moses gave an inheritance to the tribe of the sons of Reuben according to their families. Their territory was from Aroer, which is on the edge of the valley of the Arnon, with the city which is in the middle of the valley, and all the plain by Medeba, Heshbon and all its cities which are on the plain, Dibon and Bamoth Baal and Beth Baal Meon, and Jahaz and Kedemoth and Mephaeth and Kiriathaim and Sibma and Zareth Shahar on the hill of the valley, and Beth Peor and the slopes of Pisgah, and Beth Jeshemoth. 21 says, even all the cities of the plain and all the kingdom of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon, whom Moses struck with the chiefs of Midian, Evi and Rechem and Zur and Hur and Reba, the princes of Sihon who lived in the land. And verse 22 says, the sons of Israel also killed Balaam, the son of Beor, the diviner, with the sword among the rest of their slain. The border of the sons of Reuben was the Jordan. This was the inheritance of the sons of Reuben according to their families, the cities, and their villages. I read all that with the English lesson there for me to try and pronunciate all those words to tell you that Reuben's tribe had land that was on the east of the Jordan from the Arnon River, which is Moab, to Heshbon, which is the old royal city of Sihon. So if you were to look in your maps, and mine, when I flip the page, mine's got maps of the conquests and stuff there. So what Reuben's tribe was given is on the eastern side of the Jordan from the Arnon River, or Moab, as it may be spelled out in your map there, to Heshbon, or the old royal city of Sihon. So we kind of get some parameters of what their area was. And so Joshua here, they're walking through all of that. But there's one thing that kind of stood out in this section, and that was verse 22. And I was like, okay, well, they gave us a lot of information on Balaam here, the son of Beor, and it told us that he was the diviner with the sword, that they destroyed him with a sword among the rest of their slain. And I was like, okay, well, why is this one of those things that's important? Why is this one different? What was important about Balaam? And you're reminded here that apparently Balaam was one of those who, being a diviner, had some influence over little g gods. He didn't have any influence over the God of Israel. But some of their gods in that time, he supposedly had some influence over them, and so he was apparently a part of the victory over the Midianites, but it was one of those that we're reminded that God took care of him as well. And for me, I looked and I was like, okay, well, why would that be mentioned? Because, they ran through the other kings and some of those people, but this one had more information about him. And besides just spelling out who he was. I don't really have an answer to that, but my own personal belief in that would be the fact that this was someone who had some influence in that day. This was someone who people looked and go, okay, well, that's really a big win for the nation of Israel, because this guy had the favor of the gods on his side, and yet God took care of him with the sword among the rest of their slain when he took care of the Midianites. And so it's just another reminder there that yeah, there is one of those now. Is that the same one? Okay. Yeah. 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 Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. 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 Yeah, I was flipping back through to look at that story, and I did not cross-reference that one earlier, but that very well could have been why he's pulled out of there as well. But we do. We've got those people with some influence that they'll have to answer for that influence one day. And we've also got a lot of people that take that influence seriously, and they try to do their best. But there are some that, and we've seen them, we've run across them, and you got to be careful to fact check stuff. That's why I try to tell you, hey, this is where everything is that I'm talking about, that I know about, and sometimes you get my opinion, but most of the time I try to give my best interpretation and let y'all follow that as well, because that is one of those things. I mean, the Bible's clear about teachers because we're dividing the word of truth for people to digest. And so as leaders go and those that have that influence, you got to be careful. You got to be careful what you're speaking to people as truth. And you always want Scripture to back it up. That is always a one of those things that you want to be careful of. In that. So, yeah, thank you for that, David. Anybody else? Any thoughts before we move on to that next section there? So he talks there about what the tribe of Reuben has been given and their land there. Then he brings out Balaam there with his stuff and the fact that he was dealt with. That's over in... It is in, I just looked it up, Numbers 31:8 is where he is taken with the other kings of Midian, but his story actually goes into, I believe it's Numbers 22, if you want to go back and look at the story of Balaam. And I think you may be right there. Chapters 22 through 24 talks about some of that stuff there. So, so 31:8 mentions where he was killed with the kings of the Midianites, and then Numbers 22 through 24 talk about his story there if you want to go back and look at it. But he's brought back up here in this passage as one that was taken by God in this victory, and that gives the people of Reuben's tribe here, the Reubenites, their land there on the eastern side of the Jordan. Verses 24 through 28 talk about Gad and his people, where they get. And it says, Moses, verse 24 says, Moses also gave an inheritance to the tribe of Gad, to the sons of Gad, according to their families. Their territory was Jazer, and all the cities of Gilead, and half the land of the sons of Ammon, as far as Aroer, which is before Rabbah, and from Heshbon as far as Ramoth Mizpah and Beth Tonim, and from Mahanaim as far as the border of Debir, and in the valley Beth Haram and Beth Nimrah and Succoth and Zaphon, the rest of the kingdom of Zion, king of Heshbon, with the Jordan as a border, as far as the lower end of the sea of Chinnereth, beyond the Jordan to the east. This is the inheritance of the sons of Gad according to their families, the cities, and their villages. So essentially that area, if you're looking at a map, there's the central area on the eastern side of the Jordan, from Heshbon to the Sea of Galilee. That includes most of Gilead, but not all of Gilead, because that's included in part of the half-tribe of Manasseh. So Gad is kind of in the central location area there. Like I said, from Heshbon to the Sea of Galilee, or the Sea of Chinnereth, as it was called in that time. So try to give you some of the names that may be a little more familiar in some of the maps and stuff that you have, if you don't have one with the conquest of Joshua. So he walks through all of that just to tell you that they're in the central area. And then the last one he talks about is the half-tribe of Manasseh in 29 through 31. And it says this, Moses also gave an inheritance to the half-tribe of Manasseh, and it was for the half-tribe of the sons of Manasseh according to their families. Their territory was from Mahanaim, all Bashan, all the kingdom of Og, king of Bashan, and all the towns of Jair, which are in Bashan, 60 cities. So they had 60 cities that were part of it. Also half of Gilead, with Ashtaroth and Edrei. The cities of the kingdom of Og and Bashan were for the sons of Machir, the son of Manasseh, for half of the sons of Machir according to their families. And so half of the tribe of Manasseh gets the lands east and north of the Sea of Galilee there. And so that included the northern part of Gilead. So it kind of breaks down what those tribes had on that eastern side of the Jordan. Again, a lot of these chapters and stuff feel like administrative documents. It's, hey, we're giving them this, and then it breaks it down and kind of rehashes there. But there's a reason God put all this in there. Some of it shows his faithfulness to his people, and making sure that, hey, I've got all this area that I promised my people. The people that as they crossed the Jordan, the people on the eastern side of the Jordan didn't lose their land. They maintained their land, because remember when we talked about it, their warriors were supposed to come and fight with the sons of Israel, and then they were able to go and settle back in their land. But this is all of the stuff that Moses had already taken care of. He had already dealt with a lot of this, and he had divided up the land to those 2.5 tribes there. But there's 2 verses that finish up this chapter. Verse 32 says, "These are the territories which Moses apportioned for an inheritance in the plains of Moab, beyond the Jordan at Jericho to the east." But verse 33 says, "But to the tribe of Levi, Moses did not give an inheritance. The Lord, the God of Israel, is their inheritance, as he had promised to them." So I told you in verse 14 that we would see pretty much that same verse again there in verse 33. So twice here we're reminded that the tribe of Levi was not given an allotment of land. And so I began wondering, okay, why? And maybe y'all have some thoughts on that. We're gonna flip over to some other scripture in a second. But if y'all have some thoughts on that, my mind first went to, okay, why were they not given land? What would be the reason that they wouldn't have been allotted any land? Do y'all have any thoughts on that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, and that's what she was saying is it's not that there wasn't anything for them. They were supposed to be taken care of by the people because they were the priests. They had the jobs of doing sacrifices. They would do some other work. They weren't all just sitting around the tabernacle waiting for a sacrifice to happen or sin to happen so they could have a sacrifice or something like that. They did some other things there. They lived like the people did, but their job, their role in God's eyes was very important. And it was. Because without them, there was no connection to God because the connection came through the sacrifices. The connection came through what their job was supposed to do. And so they had to go through the rituals to stay clean, and they had to sacrifice these animals, and they were trained in that. And so their schooling for their children and stuff was probably a little bit more because they had to understand everything that they were supposed to step into with that role in the tribe of Levi. And so there are some things there but they were supposed to be taken care of. It's not, hey, it's one of those, you're eating the manna of the land and this is all you get. The people were supposed to provide for them, and they did. If you flip over with me to Deuteronomy chapter 18, it's referenced there in Joshua 13, but this talks about the whole, at least the first half of it, first 8 verses or so, talk about the portion for the Levites. Deuteronomy 18, verse 1 says this. It says, the Levitical priests, the whole tribe of Levi, shall have no portion or inheritance with Israel. They shall eat the Lord's offerings by fire and his portion. Verse 2 says, they shall have no inheritance among their countrymen. The Lord is their inheritance as he promised them. So for them, they didn't have a private ownership of land. Their towns and the surrounding pasture lands were set aside for their use, as were the tithes and parts of the sacrifices. But they weren't given an allotment of land. There were parts that were set aside for them to use in those lands, but they weren't specifically given, hey, here's your borders, and this is what you have. No, they were spread amongst the people, and they were given allotments through that. And so they would make sacrifices, and part of their apportionment came through those sacrifices. And it's just interesting wording to me that it says that they shall have no portion or inheritance with Israel. In verse 2, they shall have no inheritance among their countrymen. The Lord is their inheritance. They did. But it also makes me wonder, because I have 2 kids and I've divided stuff out amongst them, makes me wonder when they're sitting there and Joshua's going, hey, or Moses is looking and going, hey, here's your area. You've got from this cornerstone to that one, and you've got this plot of land. And then just north of that, we've got Gad and that tribe. They've got this plot of land. And then above that, we've got the half tribe of Manasseh. And then as Joshua starts to portion stuff out, you've got all the other 9.5 tribes. Hey, here's your land. Here's your land. And here's your land. And they divided amongst to the size of the tribes. But I wondered how many of them were looking and going, well, where's ours? If we apply human nature and what is generally human thought to this, I wonder if any of them looked and said, well, that's not fair. Y'all aren't giving us any land. That's not fair. Well, and you know, their mind could have wandered that way. Yeah, they could have had those thoughts. I think they knew what their role was, but I.
It's like you don't need to be out there working the land. You need to be in the temple.
Yeah.
Is what I want you to do, doing the sacrifices and all that. And I don't want to use a say, but we pay the preacher. You ain't supposed to be out there working.
Yeah.
For a living.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not happening then today.
Yeah.
But still, the Levites were not supposed to have to work for a living. They're supposed to be in. So give
Yeah.
them the land.
Well, and I think that's what it boils down to is that, hey, the idea behind this is they were given a special role. And the people were told, hey, you're supposed to provide for them through your abundance. And God was going to bless them. God was not going to look and go, hey, you know what? You've got 5 people in your family. I'm giving you 5 ears of corn, but you're going to have to split some of yours because 2 of those go to the Levite. God was providing here. He was going to allow there to be an abundance for his people. Because that's just how God was working there in this time. And he did that. He took what was supposed to be set aside for their tithes and their offerings and put that towards, hey, here's my people that are ministering to you, and you're supposed to take care of them with these things. But I did. Today I was wondering, as I was writing stuff out, I looked and I was like, I wonder how they felt. I wonder if they looked and said, you know what, it sure would be nice to have our own piece of land. Sure would be nice if I could plant the crops that I like. Because, you know, I don't like those beans and those taters, and I want something different. And so I wondered that. There's no backing to any of that besides the fact that they knew their inheritance was God. And David, you're right. They got the better end of the deal. Because you're looking and going, hey, you know what, if I had to pick between that land and the Lord, I think many of us now, you're looking going, hey, that land's going to be a lot of work. I'll stick with God. I'll stick with that. And then God was still a part of the whole nation. But they had something specific to do. And I think James is right with the idea that tending that much land and taking care of all that and making sure that you're part of the group that is providing for everybody else. Because I don't know that they split it up like we do. I don't think it's one of those where like, hey, that's our plot and we'll plant what we want to and provide for us and that's what we're going to do. No, I think it was, hey, here's your tribe's land. Y'all got to take care of it. And so you got to maintain it. You got to cultivate it. You got to make sure that everything's growing. You got your animals. You're keeping them out of the garden. You got your gardens that you're growing. And you're trying to feed thousands of people. And I can imagine that the work, even though this was the promised land, that was still work. And some of them would have other roles that they would fill, but the Levites had the role of making sure that the nation of Israel stayed in tune with God. Now, they were led by Joshua at this point in time. They were led by Joshua. And so, ultimately, it's his job to tell the people, hey, this is what we're supposed to do. But for the Levites, they were the ones doing the sacrifices. They were the ones doing the atonements. They're the ones that are remembering these festivals and making sure that they're worshiping the way that they're supposed to. And the sin is being atoned for. And that was a full-time job for them. And so God said, hey, I'm going to provide for you. But it's not going to be through land. You're going to have a place to live. You're going to have shelter over your head. You're going to have food on your table. He said, but I need you to be with me. And I need you to spend time with me. And I need you to make sure that you're not cutting corners on these sacrifices and that we're doing what it is that I've commanded you to do that fell to this tribe here. I just thought it was intriguing that it's mentioned twice and we're reminded that they weren't given any kind of land. They weren't given anything that they were supposed to work, because God said, hey, I've already got a job for you. And we're going to let the people take care of you so that you can do the work that you're supposed to. And it's a beautiful thing to watch. I've seen it in lots of places, and we have most definitely experienced it here. To watch God's people take care of the ones called to shepherd them is still a beautiful thing. They did it in that day and time. Y'all have most certainly done that for us, and y'all continue to do that for us. And I've seen other churches that love their pastors well and make sure that they're taken care of. And it's part of God's design, even if it looks different in one area as it does in another. But it's a pretty picture when you look and go, hey, you know what? God's still doing things through His people.
I have a copy of the original Pensacola Bay Baptist Association, which was started by, what was his first name? Lazarus Briars. And there's a picture of him up there at Pleasant Hill. He got 25 cents a month plus his food and clothes. And he traveled to about 4 different churches, either by walking or by horse. And like I said, I'm just telling you a story.
Yeah.
I have written history of that.
Yeah. That is crazy, but that is it's cool that God provided, and He was called to do a work, and God said, hey, you know what? I'll take care of you. You be faithful to me, and I'll take care of you. And that's what you're seeing here is with this tribe of Levi. He said, hey, you know what? If you'll do what I've asked you to do, you don't have to worry about land. You don't have to worry about those things. I'm going to take care of you. It's neat to see that, even though today you'd probably get some people that would look and go, hey, you know what? Why aren't we getting anything? Why don't we get our stuff? Why is it this way? It's a lot of people, and that is one of those things that it's easy to fall into that trap of, hey, I want more. And guess what? You do the same thing you did with less when you have more. Oftentimes, it's hard to be good stewards of when you're given more. And so, the goal is just to be faithful with what God has given us, and if He blesses us, then we turn around and bless others. And that's been cool to see His church do that for us. Any other thoughts on Joshua 13 or even the passage there of Deuteronomy 18 or any of those things that we've talked about tonight? Any thoughts on those verses? Yes, sir. Yeah. 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 Yeah, it is. It's really neat that you can trace some of these groups all the way back to the beginning of Scripture. I mean, you go all the way into Cain and Abel, and there wasn't a whole lot of hope for Cain and his people, the people that would come from him because of what he had done. Those sins just carried on through, and not a whole. There's not anything good that you read out of those, but you also see those other people that look and go, hey, you know what, Lord, I don't want to wait on you. I want to do what I want to do, and it doesn't always turn out well. And that's the hard thing for us is we got to be patient. We got to wait on Him. We got to move when God says to move. We do the things that God wants us to do, and we can't push ahead, although we'd like to. And oftentimes we think, hey, I've got the solution. I've got the answer. Here it is. We can go ahead and do this. We got to wait on Him because there's a reason that God says, hey, you know what? Give it some time. Things will shake out, and I'm going to show you my will. I'm going to show you what it is I want you to do. And sometimes we put ourselves in bigger issues than we were in by pushing too fast. So definitely, thank you for that, David. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? If not, let's turn our attention to our prayer and praise requests and stuff that we have.